To make the changes in the web API for incorporating the new additional properties that we have in this React application, what we'll have to do is we'll have to modify the SQL table first. That is because this SQL table is the one that is going to hold all the information. When we enter the information in the React application through browser, this is the table where all of the information is finally getting stored, and then it will be retrieved on the screen again. So what we'll have to do is we'll need to modify this table. We'll be running an alter table command. I want to add new columns over here. So let me just take the information of those columns from here. I'll just copy the names. Let it be begin. And then we have property city, which will be varchar 50 maybe, and then we have property action. Again, let's keep it varchar 20, is fine. And then we have move and flag. So this is a Boolean property on the React application. In SQL, what we'll have to do is keep it as bit. So when there is a Boolean property in the code, we'll have to keep it as a bit column. True would stand for 1 in SQL and false would stand for 0. So this particular column would have only 1 or 0 as the value in it. So let's execute this command. It says command completed successfully. And over here, if I just check the table now, it has the 4 new columns. Because we had entered this data earlier, the value of these records for these columns is null. Now what we'll do is simply make changes to our web API. For posting the data into the table, the web API method is already in place. We have to make the changes to our model over here. Let me just take the column names from here, and that is what we are going to use to add the properties in the model. It's going to be public string. Okay, the contact number would be int only. And property city, property action, and then the move in flag. So this is going to be bool. And over here, just making the final changes. So now that we have our model ready, we'll just go back to the API method again. So over here, we don't need to make any changes for saving the data. But once the data is saved, we are returning a message. So for that, we'll need to make some changes so that appropriate JSON is returned from the web API to the React application. So over here, I'll just add a model. Let's name it add listing response. And currently, let's keep only one property over here. That is going to be response message, which could be read by the React application. I'll just save it. We'll go to the controller. Over here, we are returning the message by setting over here. So let's have add listing response, and then response. We are just trying to initialize, and in this we are trying to set the response message as return message, or let's keep it over here and then string result is equal to JSON convert. This is through newtonsoft.json, and we are trying to serialize this response object into a JSON string. Once that is done, we want to just return this result. Okay, this should be good. And let me just save the changes over here. We'll run the solution. And now while the solution is running, we'll go to the Visual Studio Code and make changes over here to post the data. So in this function, when we are submitting the form, we have already created our request data. So let's simply call the method. We have to just set the request options first for the HTTP post method, and this is post. The headers would simply have content type, that is going to be JSON. So application / JSON. After this, we need to set the body of the request. So we just simply want to stringify this object, that is request data, into a JSON string. After that is done, we need to call the API URL, and we'll need to get that URL from here. So this is the post method that we have, and the API URL will just simply pass some random strings. Let me just give random value only. Random value over here, so that we can simply get the API URL once we have executed. And let me just remove the ID column, execute. The details are saved successfully, and now that you notice over here, we are getting it as a JSON result. So we have verified our API changes through Swagger also. So we'll take this request URL now, go to the Visual Studio Code. Over here, we'll utilize the fetch method to call this URL. So over here, I have mentioned the URL and pass the request options that we just created. Once we are calling, we have the response with us, which is expected to be JSON, of course. And then what we want to do is get the data and display on the console once. So doing a console log of the data that we receive. So we are utilizing the fetch method only. We have mentioned over here that it is a post method. So the call would be post call only. I'll just save the changes and go to the React application again. I am refreshing the page, opening console, because we want to show what response we are receiving from the API. We have seen on the Swagger, but we need to get it on the React application also. And let's check the data in the table first before calling our API through the React application, because we have already called it once through Swagger. So these are the random values that we just entered. But now we'll be passing the data into the table through the React application. Now giving some random values again, and the contact number, department, it is to be sold, ready to move in. So let's submit the form now. And over here, we see that this is the request that we have done a console log of. This is appropriate according to the form that we have submitted. And we are receiving the response message as well from the API. Details saved successfully. Now, if we just go to the SQL table and run a select query, over here we are seeing that the data is saved successfully. If I simply make some changes that it is not ready to move in, we want to rent out, and it is a studio apartment. Make some changes over here, and yeah, studio apartment. So let's keep the values as such. Clear out the console again, submitting the form. The values are correct for the request, and again we are receiving details saved successfully response. So if we just do a select again, we have an entry for the new record as well. The move-in flag is 0. So you're able to see that when the checkbox is checked, at that time we are sending true. That means value 1 will be saved in the table for bit operator. And when we have not checked it, at that time 0 is getting saved. So this is how true and false would work in the SQL table. I hope all of you have understood the create operation that we have just performed in the React full stack project.